you grew up as I did, playing Marble Madness, that sound probably sounds really, really familiar. And the feel of this game, the contours of the 6 courses, and the annoyance of some of the enemies, like that damn black ball and that drawbridge that would never go down, have probably still driven rivets into your brain. Marble Madness is a fascinating game. It was one of the most successful to use a trackball, appeared on a huge swath of platforms, and revolutionized the world of game based physics and two-player games. It also pushed the barriers of technology at the time, showing developers what could be possible with graphics, music, simultaneous play, and more. At the same time, technological limitations left ideas on the table, and the short length of the game left players unsatisfied. A sequel, with more ideas and levels, went unpublished, leaving players like you and I with the memory of the original game and potential unfulfilled. This is Marble Madness, a game story. Marble Madness, like many games of the era, was an Atari Games property and first designed as an arcade cabinet. Its lead designer was Mark Cerny, who was a mere 18 years old at the time of the development. Despite that, Cerny was relatively experienced, having worked on games like Millipede and Major Havoc. The game started development in the early 1980s, with Cerny drawing influence from a wide array of sources, including M.C. Escher paintings, racing games, and minigolf. Originally, Cerny was essentially designing a minigolf game. Cerny's idea was to use the slopes of the course to create excitement for the player. However, Atari didn't like the idea. So Cerny turned to racing games, with his idea being to have players simultaneously race each other on long tracks. However, graphical limitations at the time forced Cerny to look elsewhere. As such, development was switched so players were racing against the clock and, to a lesser extent, each other. So let's talk about that aspect for a second. Development on Marble Madness started after the video game crash of 1983, which was caused, in part, by the release of a ton of crap games. And I mean crap shovelware games. Concerned with development quality, Cerny decided to emphasize the unique elements of this game, pushing to make a new and innovative product. And that he did. The final version of Marble Madness was unique for two primary reasons. First was the control scheme. In fact, Cerny originally tried to deploy a motorized trackball. If it had worked, the trackball would have spun faster when the ball was going downhill and slower when the ball was going uphill. This would have been a totally new system. Unfortunately, technical limitations came into play again, and the unique design couldn't be used. As such, a regular trackball was deployed. Second was this idea of simultaneous gameplay. Two-player games are obviously not anything new and had been around since the beginning of arcade games. What was newer was the idea that two players would play the same game simultaneously. This enabled players to race each other and mess with each other. You could just as easily cheer on your friend as you could bump them off of the course. Obviously, the real goal was to beat the other player. Players who did so would be awarded an extra 5 seconds of time on the next level. It was absolutely possible for one player to beat the game while the other player failed to do so. Now, this was in an era before split screens was possible, leading to a real problem. What happened if one player moved so fast that the other player couldn't keep up? A solution was implemented whereby the slower player would be warped to the faster player's location with a 5-second penalty. At the end of every level, however much time you had was carried over to the next stage, with a maximum of 99 seconds being possible. You'd also get shifting amounts of additional time, meaning that while your progress was cumulative, you did get bonuses for making it from one level to the next. If you ran out of time, you died. Although you would sometimes get lucky and a magic wand would appear over your ball, giving you extra time and the chance to continue playing. From a technical perspective, Cerny and the lead programmer, Bob Flanagan, moved out of Atari's comfort zone. Marble Madness was the first Atari game to use the C programming language, and while that created a better game, it also meant that the game operated at a lower speed than other Atari games at the time. The game was also the first to use an FM sound chip, producing a unique soundtrack with unique sound effects that weren't present anywhere else on the market. Development took 10 months, and the game was released as an arcade cabinet in December 1984. In its final version, the game presented 6 levels. It opened with Practice, a simple level that was basically straight downhill, and introduced players to the basics of the game, including gravity and ramps. Players could complete that level in as quick as 6 seconds if they were speedy. The next level, Beginner, was longer and featured more ramps as well as chutes and bad guys in the form of that evil black ball and these green slinky things. It also had an insanely difficult to navigate ramp which could cost you the entire game if you weren't careful. Beginner was followed by Intermediate, which contained narrow tracks, more evil slinkies, and pools of acid. Its ending also introduced this extremely narrow section that demanded exceptionally precise movement and timing. Aerial came next. Why Aerial? Well, this level required the deployment of this flying scoopy thing. It also introduced a choice. You could either negotiate launch pads that sent your marble flying into the air, or use this extremely narrow pathway. The ending was arguably the most frustrating of any level in the game. You had these brown hammers that you had to negotiate while also leaving no room for error when it came to your movement. Level 5 was a silly level, arguably the most fun. Here, gravity was reversed. Up was down, down was up, and as the game warned ahead of time, everything you know is wrong. Few players got through this level on their first try. However, done right, this level could earn you a slew of bonus time after you destroyed the shrunken enemies that had been torturing you in previous levels. And at last, there was the ultimate race, which combined everything you knew about the previous levels. There was a highly unique track design that transported you from one aerial platform to the next, narrow pathways, and some deeply sinister music. The game concluded with arguably the most difficult section of any level, platforms that appeared and disappeared in a pattern. Negotiate these platforms, you win. So the arcade version was a huge hit. It initially sold 4,000 cabinets, although sales did begin to slow after 7 weeks, something that Cerny felt was due to the game's relatively short length. With only 6 levels, it was an easy game to master. And from there, well, there wasn't a lot for players to enjoy, save for the two-player mode that allowed you to smash your marble into a friend. The short length didn't stop critical reception or hurt the game's legacy. Numerous game magazines and websites, including GameSpot, named the game one of the best arcade games ever made. As quickly as 1986, the game started to get ported for various home consoles. This included all the major players at the time, including the Apple II, Commodore 64, Game Boy, Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and more. Including mobile phone adaptations, 16 different ports of the game were ultimately produced. We're talking about a game from the mid to late 80s. That's pretty damn good. As you would imagine, the ports have various differences in terms of their color, soundtrack, and more. By and large, the games are faithful to each other, although the Commodore 64 and Apple versions actually have a secret level that isn't available in any other version. The game was successful enough that other developers, though not including Cerny, took a run at a sequel. The development of Marble Man, Marble Madness 2 was led by lead programmer Bob Flanagan, and tweaked the game to reflect what was popular in gaming at the time. It featured a main character that was basically a superhero. It also included new ball abilities like flying and invisible balls, mini games, and a 3-player simultaneous mode. Most impressively, the game was expanded to include 17 levels. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. The new version of the game tested poorly, particularly against Street Fighter II, which was also being released at the same time. Atari tried the game without trackballs and switched it to standard joysticks, but players still didn't like it. In later interviews, Flanagan would attribute the game's failure to launch to his switch to Marble Man, saying he wished he had kept the marble abstract. As such, Marble Madness 2 was abandoned, although the game has obviously since been leaked online. Now, don't feel too bad for Mark Cerny. He would become a legend in the gaming community, working on dozens of games, including Sonic 2, Spyro the Dragon, Spider-Man, and Death Stranding. In 2004, he was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contributions to the gaming industry. Marble Madness was a great game. It was unique, addictive, and had a two-player feature that no one else could touch at the time. It sold well, was ported repeatedly, and ultimately is still known today. At the same time, it's a game story that, like many, was unfulfilled. The original concept wasn't technologically possible. Features had to be pulled back because of a lack of technological tools. It had a unique trackball design that didn't work. The game was way too short and thus had limited replayability, damning for an arcade game at the time. A sequel could have addressed many of these challenges, but unfortunately, marketing forces decided that Marble Madness 2 would never see the light of day. However, the game is still a classic, and its real flaws can't take away from its legacy. Marble Madness pushed the limits of what was possible in a physics-based racing game, and for that, it deserves its story to be told. And that is it for this edition of Almost Something, a Game Story. This is obviously a newer video for us, so I hope you liked it. If you did, please click the like button, click the subscribe button, leave a comment, give me a game suggestion, let me know what you want, and I'm happy to take a look. Thank you, my friends. Have a wonderful day, and as always, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I did making it.